Have you ever left a room, not because of what was said, but because of how much? There are wounds that come from being shouted at, and there are wounds that come from never being able to speak. But there's a quieter wound, the one we rarely notice, the wound of talking too much and saying too little. We speak, endlessly, habitually, mechanically, because silence makes us nervous, because silence reveals us. We talk to avoid the weight of a moment. We explain ourselves to feel accepted. We share stories hoping someone will validate our version of reality. But the more we speak, the more we dilute our energy, our mystery, our authority. Words, once sacred, become noise, like water spilling through open hands. Seneca once wrote, "Speech, if it is not carefully considered, does more harm than good." But how often do we stop to consider? How often do we pause, not to think of what to say next, but to ask, is this even worth saying? In a world obsessed with expression, we've forgotten the weight of restraint, to hold a thought, to tame a reaction, to resist the urge to be understood. We confuse verbosity with strength, but those who speak the most often do so from fear, not power. Fear of being forgotten, fear of being misunderstood, fear of being silent long enough to hear their own doubts. And so we defend, we justify, we clarify, until we are exhausted, not by others, but by the noise we create within ourselves. The Stoics taught, we have 2 ears and 1 mouth, so that we can listen twice as much as we speak. Epictetus lived this. He knew, control begins not with your fists, but with your lips. Look around you. Who do you admire most in a room? The loudest, the fastest to respond, or the one who listens, waits, and speaks only when it matters? There is power in that kind of silence, not the silence of weakness, but the silence of containment, of someone who doesn't need to win every moment, of someone who knows their value isn't up for negotiation. Marcus Aurelius wrote in his private reflections, "Waste no more time arguing what a good man should be. Be one." And perhaps that includes wasting no more words trying to prove your goodness. Because here's the truth no one tells you. Every time you speak without control, you teach the world how to ignore you. Every filler word, every overshare, every impulsive reply, it's a slow erosion of your gravity. And what happens to people who lose their gravity? They float, they drift. They stop being taken seriously, not because they lack intelligence, but because they couldn't guard their voice. Words should be released like arrows, with direction, precision, and purpose, not scattered like confetti in a windstorm. The wise do not rush to fill the air. They observe, they absorb, they wait. Because they understand this, sometimes power is not in what you say, but in what you withhold. Silence is a mirror. It reflects who is calm and who is desperate. It reveals who is centered and who is crumbling on the inside, desperate to be seen, heard, validated. So ask yourself, how many of your words come from peace and how many from panic? What would happen if, for one day, you spoke half as much, but with twice the presence? Not withdrawn, not passive, but deliberate. That is the silent strategy of the wise. To speak when speaking is rare. To use silence not as retreat but as command. To be the calm center in a world that never shuts up. That kind of presence cannot be faked. It is earned through restraint, through stillness, through the courage to let the moment breathe. So next time you're tempted to explain yourself, ask, what am I trying to prove? And to whom? And then, see what happens when you don't. Some fires don't need wood. They just need one careless word. You've felt it. The heat rising in your chest, the trembling in your voice, the sharpness in your tongue. You speak, not to be heard, but to release the pressure. Anger doesn't always arrive screaming. Sometimes it walks in quietly, dressed as frustration or disappointment or the feeling of not being respected. Again. And so you talk, fast, loud, without filter, without pause. And the words that leave your mouth carry more than meaning. They carry poison. You say things you don't fully mean, or worse, You say exactly what you mean, but in a way that scars. And once those words are out, you can't take them back. The Stoic philosopher Epictetus warned, "Any person capable of angering you becomes your master." That's the truth hidden beneath every outburst. When you explode, you are no longer in command. Your emotions are steering the wheel. You are reacting, not choosing. You are bleeding, not leading. And the tragedy? It often happens with the people you love the most. Your child, your partner, your aging parent. The people closest to your heart become the targets of your unprocessed storms. Why? Because they're safe. Because you think they'll understand. Because deep down you believe they won't leave. But every outburst leaves a mark. Not always visible. Not always spoken of. But the weight lingers. You say, "I didn't mean it," but they remember anyway. Marcus Aurelius, in his Journal of Self-Discipline, wrote, "How much more harmful are the consequences of anger than the causes of it? The moment passes, but the echo remains. And afterward, the shame, the guilt, the silent vow, I won't do that again, until you do." Because anger is not just a reaction, it's a habit. It builds paths in the brain. It becomes easier to explode than to reflect. And over time, your words stop being bridges. They become weapons. You begin to notice people flinch when you speak. They avoid certain topics. They retreat before you even raise your voice. That is when anger has not only escaped through your mouth, it has entered your identity. But there is a way back. The Stoics never said, "Don't feel anger." They said, "Don't serve it. Don't let it own you. Don't let it speak for you." Seneca dedicated an entire book to this one emotion. In it, he said, "No plague has cost the human race more." He wasn't exaggerating. Nations fall to it. Marriages break from it. Children carry it for decades. So how do you stop? It starts 1 second earlier. That moment, right before the words escape, that is your battlefield. Feel the heat rise. Breathe. Feel the throat tighten. Pause. Notice your body lean forward. Step back. This is not suppression. This is control. And control is strength. You are not weak for holding your tongue. You are wise. Because silence in that moment is not passive. It is protective. You're not avoiding conflict. You're avoiding destruction. Imagine if every angry sentence was paused by just 10 seconds. Imagine the friendships saved. The children not frightened. The doors that were never slammed. Anger is not evil. It's a signal. But it should never be a driver. Let it rise. Observe it. Don't fear it. But don't let it choose your words. Because you'll find, when you hold that fire long enough, it burns off the noise and leaves behind something more honest. Your true hurt. Your real need. Your deeper truth. And that is worth expressing. But not in fury. In clarity. So next time your mouth begins to speak in heat, ask yourself, what will this sentence cost me? Will I be proud of these words tomorrow? Am I reacting from my wound or responding from my wisdom? Then, breathe, hold, and speak only if the words will build, not break. Because when you master the mouth, you begin to master the storm. Most people speak to be seen, but the wise, they stay quiet to see. There's a kind of silence that's not emptiness, but power. It's not the silence of fear. It's not shutting down. It's not weakness or retreat. It's presence, centered, composed, rooted like a mountain that doesn't move when the wind screams. In the noise of daily life, opinions flying, emotions flaring, egos clashing, silence becomes a kind of rebellion, a refusal to be pulled into every drama, every bait, every test of ego. Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "You always have the option of having no opinion. That's not apathy. That's sovereignty. That's what strength looks like in stillness." Think of the strongest people you've met, the ones who didn't need to prove themselves. They didn't talk over others. They didn't correct every mistake. They didn't react to every provocation. They looked. They listened. They held their space like it was sacred, and it was. Because silence, when chosen, is not absence. It's a kind of declaration. I don't need to react. I don't need to win this moment. I don't need to show you who I am. I already know. That's the shift, from reactive to rooted, from impulsive to intentional. We live in a time where silence is misunderstood. If you don't answer quickly, you're seen as weak. If you don't share everything, you're called cold. If you don't argue back, they think you've lost. But those who live by that rule, they burn out fast. Because not every opinion needs a reply. Not every insult deserves a defense. And not every invitation to conflict requires your presence. Epictetus taught, "It is not things themselves that disturb us, but our opinions about them." And often our mouths are simply echoing our opinions. Not truth, not wisdom, just noise. But the wise pause. And in that pause, they see deeper. They see what the other person is really saying. They hear what's not being said. They feel the storm behind the words. And instead of reacting, they choose. They choose to wait, to withhold, to let the moment cool before they enter. That's not silence out of fear. That's silence as precision, like an archer who doesn't fire on impulse but waits for the exact moment when the shot is clean. This kind of silence builds trust, not just from others, but within yourself. Because you begin to feel, I am not owned by every emotion. I am not moved by every wave. I don't have to answer every call. This is where your strength returns. Not in words, not in performance, but in your groundedness. And slowly, people feel it. They lean in when you speak. They listen more because you speak less. Your words gain weight not because they're louder, but because they're rarer. Seneca said, "Even silence may be more expressive than speech." And he was right. There's a kind of silence that commands the room, that silences the egos around it without force. Because it's not resisting, it's transcending. You become like water, unshakable, patient, unstoppable. So the next time you're pulled into argument, pause. The next time someone tests your pride, breathe. The next time your anger rises to speak, wait, and feel what happens in that stillness. You'll notice something strange. You don't lose ground. You gain it. You don't feel powerless. You feel untouchable. And maybe, just maybe, you'll start to trust that your silence says more about your strength than 1,000 well-formed replies ever could. Because the voice of the wise doesn't always speak. It simply stands, quiet, clear, unmoved. Control doesn't begin with your fists. It begins with your lips. Before the hand strikes, before the door slams, before the regret sinks in, the mouth opens. That's where mastery is either kept or lost. The Stoics weren't saints. They were soldiers of the inner life. They knew that the battle for peace isn't out there, in politics, in people, in possessions. It's in here, in the space between impulse and expression. Epictetus, born a slave, said it plainly. First learn the meaning of what you say and then speak. Simple, but almost no one does it. Most of us speak to react, to vent, to prove, to control the moment, not ourselves. But the Stoics believed this. If your mouth isn't disciplined, your mind isn't either. You want to know someone's level of inner control? Don't look at their posture. Listen to how they speak. Do they interrupt, defend everything, over-explain, dominate the air? Or do they speak with care, like their words have a price? Because they do. Every word you speak costs you something. Energy, focus, clarity. And the undisciplined mouth is expensive. It drains your presence, it cheapens your authority. It scatters your attention across 10 meaningless directions. But when the mouth is still, the mind has space to observe. And when the mind observes, it begins to understand. That's the way of the Stoic. To live not reacting but reflecting. To let the emotion rise, without letting it speak first. Marcus Aurelius, Emperor of Rome, wrote, "The best revenge is not to be like your enemy," which means, when someone insults you, stay silent. When someone provokes you, breathe. When your ego demands to respond, refuse. That is not weakness. That is formidability. Most people are predictable. They can be baited with one sentence. You know exactly what they'll say next, because they're ruled by their emotion in real time. But the one who pauses, who watches their thoughts before letting them out, that person becomes untouchable, because mastery is not visible, it's internal, and it often looks like restraint. The modern world doesn't reward silence. It rewards noise, content, comments, quick takes, performances. But that's not where power is. Power is in the pause. Power is in the choice not to say what you feel until what you feel has been refined into wisdom. Seneca wrote, "The wise man is the master of his emotions, not their slave." And what is speech but emotion in motion? If you don't own your emotion, your mouth becomes its puppet. But when you do, when you contain, when you distill, your words become rare, and rare things hold value. Imagine walking through life with the calmness of someone who doesn't need to speak to be understood, who doesn't need to be loud to be heard, who knows that silence often says more than sound. That's what the Stoics cultivated, a presence that spoke louder than their voice ever could. And in that presence, people leaned in. Because here's a truth most forget. You don't have to say much, if who you are already speaks volumes. That's why Stoicism isn't just philosophy. It's practice. It's a way of breathing, a way of holding your posture, your mouth, your mind, like a warrior holds a blade, with precision, with care, and only when necessary. So if you truly want to begin mastering yourself, don't start with your plans. Start with your mouth. Before you give advice, ask, "Is this needed?" Before you tell your story, ask, "Is this for clarity or ego?" Before you speak in anger, ask, "Will this reflect who I want to be?" And if not, wait, hold. Let the heat pass. Let the silence do its work. Because sometimes the most stoic act in the world is simply to close your mouth and then return to yourself. Some voices echo, not because they're loud, but because they're rare. In a world drowning in noise, clarity is rebellion, precision is power, and silence, used wisely, is a scalpel. To speak less and yet say more is not just a skill, it's a posture of the soul. Most people confuse talking with connecting, but real connection isn't built by words alone. It's built by presence, by intention, by restraint. The wise understand this. Every word is a thread, and when you speak, you're weaving something, a bond, a bridge, or sometimes a boundary. But if you keep pulling thread after thread without care, the fabric tears. We've all felt it. Conversations that should have ended sooner, explanations that became justifications, truths that got lost in too many details. The mouth kept moving, but the meaning got buried. Marcus Aurelius said, "Don't waste what remains of your life in guessing what others are doing or thinking. Be simple, be direct." Simplicity is not lack, it's focus. It's removing the excess so the essential can shine. And this applies to how you speak. So how do you speak less than and say more? It begins with intention. Before you speak, ask yourself, why am I saying this? To impress, to prove, to fill the silence, or to add something meaningful? That one question, why, can cut your words in half and double their impact. Next comes rhythm. The wise speak in waves, not floods. They know the power of a pause, of letting silence hold the weight of a sentence. Because in that space, the listener breathes, and the words sink deeper. Seneca once wrote, "Speech that's true and brief is like lightning. It strikes, and it is remembered." The goal is not to say everything, it's to say the right thing, at the right time, with the right energy. Sometimes the right thing is a single sentence that leaves room for thought. Sometimes it's a question that opens a door instead of a lecture that closes it. Here's something few understand. The less you speak, the more others lean in. Because now, your words carry weight. They aren't cheap. They've been filtered by thought. They've passed through silence. And silence is a powerful editor. It removes the ego. It softens the reactivity. It sharpens the message. Try this. The next time you're in a conversation, don't rush to fill every gap. Let others speak. Let the moment breathe. Hold your sentence just 1 second longer than usual. You'll begin to notice something strange. People start listening differently. They feel your calm, your control, your groundedness, because you're not performing. You're present. Another way to speak less and say more. Use fewer words, but make them stronger. Instead of saying, "I just feel like maybe I need to start working on setting some boundaries because lately I've been feeling kind of overwhelmed," say, "I need space. I'm overwhelmed." It's not cold, it's clear. The more direct you are with yourself, the more clean your voice becomes with others. This doesn't mean cutting empathy, it means cutting fog. And clarity is kindness here to yourself and to those around you. Epictetus reminds us, "We have 2 ears and 1 mouth so that we may listen twice as much as we speak." And in that ratio lives the secret to true influence. Because when you listen deeply, to others, to your inner state, to the space between the lines, your words begin to emerge not from ego, but from understanding. They're no longer reactions, they're responses, rooted, measured, intentional. And those kinds of words, they land. Not like noise, but like truth. So the next time you're tempted to talk too much, ask yourself, can this be said with fewer words? Would this be more powerful if I let it breathe? Am I speaking to connect or to control? Because when your words come from silence, they carry the silence with them. And silence, real silence, is the most respected voice in any room. Silence is power. But silence is not always the answer. There are moments, rare, precise, and sacred, when your voice must rise. Not as noise, but as truth. The Stoics did not worship silence. They used it as a tool, as a weapon, as a gate. And sometimes, that gate must open. Marcus Aurelius, the emperor and philosopher, once wrote, "If it is not right, do not do it. If it is not true, do not say it. But what if it is true? What if it is right?" Then silence becomes avoidance. And avoidance is not stoic. It's fear dressed in self-control. There are times when silence protects, and times when it betrays. When injustice happens, your silence may feel like peace, but to someone else it feels like abandonment. When a boundary is crossed, your silence may keep the moment calm, but your soul begins to rot in resentment. When you're drowning inside, your silence may seem noble, but your body starts screaming in other ways. Sleeplessness, fatigue, isolation. So yes, there is a time to speak, but not to prove, not to dominate, not to control. Speak to reveal, speak to align, speak to protect what must not be compromised. Epictetus taught, "Don't explain your philosophy, embody it." But sometimes to embody it, you must declare it. You must say, "No, this is not acceptable. I am not okay. This is what I value. This is where I stand." That kind of speech is not ego. It is integrity made audible. And it is terrifying, because it's not just about being heard, it's about being seen. When you finally speak your real truth, you risk everything: rejection, misunderstanding, even loss. But if you don't speak it, you lose something greater, your alignment with yourself. And over time, that misalignment becomes suffering. So how do you know when it's time? You know by the tension in your chest, the truth trying to rise like a wave held underwater, the ache of words that were swallowed too long. Not every moment is the right moment, but some moments are now or never. Seneca wrote, "Sometimes even to live is an act of courage, and sometimes to speak is that act. The courage to name what others avoid, to set the boundary, to ask for what you need, to say the hard thing with love, even when your voice shakes. But there's a condition. When you speak, speak cleanly. No venom, no drama, no performance. Let your words carry the strength of calm, the power of clarity, the weight of presence. Say what you mean, not to wound, but to wake. And once you've spoken, don't defend it. Let the words stand, like stone, like breath, like a tree that doesn't explain its roots. Because truth doesn't need approval, it needs courage. And that courage, is the bridge between silence and transformation. So speak when the silence starts to cost you your peace. Speak when staying quiet becomes self-betrayal. Speak when the words will liberate, not wound. But speak slowly. Speak wisely. Speak from the still part of yourself, not the storm. Because when your silence has been chosen and your voice has been earned, your words can move mountains. Not with volume, but with truth. There comes a moment, not loud, not dramatic, when you realize something has shifted. You no longer speak to prove. You no longer react to be right. You no longer throw words like stones just because you're hurting. You've changed. Your voice has weight now. Not because it's louder, but because it's earned. You've become a guardian of the word. And that is not a title. It's a responsibility. One the Stoics carried quietly, like fire in the hand. In ancient times, words were sacred. They were spells, oaths, bridges. People believed what you said shaped the world. They weren't wrong. Today, we throw them carelessly. We post, vent, perform, confess, then wonder why we feel empty. But when you begin to speak less, when you choose silence not out of fear, but as a form of honor, you feel something return. Your center, your presence, your power. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "Let your words be few and well chosen, like a man who counts each one." That's the standard, not perfection, not poetic elegance, but precision, intention, truth. You begin to notice. You no longer explain yourself to people who don't deserve access. You no longer give away your thoughts to fill a silence. You no longer rush to reply because you found something deeper than reaction. Stillness. That's what it means to be a guardian of the word. You carry your speech like a blade, not to harm, but to protect, not to conquer, but to cut through illusion. You learn to speak only when the words match the moment, not to impress, not to escape, but to name what must be named. And when you do speak, people feel it, because there's no confusion in your tone, no tremor in your truth, no blur in your boundary. That kind of voice doesn't come from reading quotes. It comes from discipline. It comes from silence. It comes from choosing again and again to remain grounded when everything in you wants to react. Epictetus said, "Practice silence, and in that silence observe." That's where wisdom grows. In the pause, in the stillness between thought and speech, where you become something rare, someone whose words mean something. And so you speak less, but what you say echoes. Not because it's louder, but because it's real. So where does this leave you? Right here, in the quiet power of someone who no longer wastes breath, who no longer betrays themselves just to be heard, who no longer speaks just to fill the void. Now you wait. Now you observe. Now you speak when the soul says, "Now," because you've seen what happens when you lose control, when anger escapes, when the ego performs, when the silence is broken too soon. And now, you choose differently. You carry your words like a ritual, like a monk carries fire, like a warrior who no longer seeks to fight but knows exactly when to draw the blade. This is the final shift. You don't speak to control anymore. You speak because you are in control. And sometimes, you don't speak at all. Not because you're passive, but because your silence says everything. That is the voice of the wise. The voice the world needs. The voice that doesn't echo in the air, but in the soul. You began this video with a quiet ache. A memory, maybe, of a conversation that went too far, of words you couldn't take back, of silence you wish you had chosen. You came here wondering, can I speak less and still be heard? Can I stop explaining myself and still be respected? Now you know. You don't need to raise your voice to be powerful. You don't need to react to be present. You don't need to flood the moment with words to matter. You've seen what happens when anger speaks first. You've seen the cost of explaining to those who refuse to listen. You've felt the emptiness of always trying to be understood. And now, you've remembered something deeper. That silence is not the absence of strength. It is its origin. You've remembered what the Stoics knew. That inner mastery begins at the mouth. That restraint is not weakness, but sovereignty. That speech, when rare and rooted, can pierce through confusion like lightning through storm clouds. So as you return to your world, your conversations, your conflicts, your choices, carry this. You are not here to win arguments. You are here to embody peace. Let your voice be a calm current. Let your silence be your shield. Let your words be rare and unforgettable. Because when you speak less and listen more, you don't disappear. You become undeniable.